What's going on, guys? Rivero here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. I had to make a list so I wouldn't forget all this stuff. Alright, first off, as you can see, Din's Fire now works. It does look like you take damage. You don't, though, because I make sure to add resistance from it. Looks really cool. I did have to do one thing to make it so that this actually works, which was to change the texture of firework particles to look like flames. Hopefully that doesn't become a problem later where I need to use the firework particle, but hopefully it should be fine. As you can see, it does use magic, 3 levels, and once we get to 0, and we try to use again, it says not enough magic. Now, another thing before we go through the other ones is items like rupees and hearts and item pickups will now despawn in a shorter amount of time than normal items would. As you will see right here, yes.
Yes!
So, mainly did that because when you kill certain enemies, even if the player doesn't kill them, it would drop the items. And while I know they're in loot tables, there is a way to make it so that if the player kills it, then it drops it. There's still stuff like the boomerang, where if you kill it with the boomerang, it won't drop items. So, it is better just to do it this way. Next up, we'll go ahead and show Neru's Love. So you right-click it when you have magic. And we get a little particle effect under us and some sound effects. So we have resistance, and I believe we are completely invulnerable to any attacks. Yep, as you can see here, we're taking no damage, just like in the game. After a certain amount of time, the sound effect will start getting faster and higher pitched, which means it's about to run out, as you can hear right here. And then it's done. So now you are vulnerable to attacks again. Now, before we show Fair's Wind, I want to show some optimizing I had to make before I could actually make this work without being completely, confused. It'll make sense here in a second. Okay. So here's what it looked like before in my loop file for teleporting. So it tests for if the player's in a certain area, and then does all the stuff that it needs to do beforehand, and then teleports the player. So things like resetting positions and respawning enemies when going through certain areas, you have to put all of that before you teleport the player. In this case, there's only resetting the chests and playing the music, but in other points there's more stuff that you need to add, such as teleporting things constantly, adding different music, changing the tag that the player has for the certain area they're in, and stuff like this where it gets completely out of hand. Now, it looks like this, where it tests for if the player's in a certain area and then runs a function with the file. So here we have the twins' house. We can go here and we have the inside and outside. That way these aren't running all the time, because normally it would test this command 4 or 5 times, which is really not good. Doing this also helps with Fair's Wind, because with certain places like the dungeons, like the Deku Tree, we can test for if the Fair Wind is there before teleporting the player to the entrance. Also, it helps because not only did I create Fair's Wind, but there are now respawn points at the beginning of dungeons, as well as when you respawn in the overworld, you spawn in Link's house. Long story short, that basically just helped me make it so that you can respawn in the correct places and be capable of using Fair's Wind. So we are not in a dungeon right now, so it will tell us that you cannot use Fair's Wind. So let's go ahead and get our level up. So we go ahead and walk in, and we right click. We can now cast Fair's Wind. So this is a little bit different from most items that I have. Not sure how I like it, because you can kind of spam it, but it doesn't have any bugs that I've seen yet. So we can go ahead and create a warp point with whatever one of these we have, and it'll spawn this. So wherever we're standing, it'll summon Fair's Wind. In the game, it normally teleports to certain entrances, but I don't see a problem with just summoning it anywhere. So if we try to create another warp point, it won't allow us to. If we leave and try to create a warp point, it still won't allow us. And if we go ahead and right click again, it'll say you cast Fair's Wind. Worth noting that when you create a warp point, that's when it takes the levels away. So we can go ahead and dispel the warp point, which just pretty much deletes it. And then we can cast another one. And then we can go ahead and try returning to warp point, which it basically just does as it says. Now, similarly like in the game, which kind of sucks, if you are not in a dungeon, you still can't use it. So you can't teleport to the dungeon from anywhere you're at, unless you're in a different dungeon, which we'll show now. Alright, here we are in Dodongo's Cavern. If we right click, we can go ahead and return to the warp point, which takes us back to the Deku Tree, and respawns any enemies that have died. Very cool, just like in the game pretty much, which I'm really happy with. Also, if you try to dispel or return when there's no warp point, it's still not going to do anything. And that's the three things. I still don't know what to call them as a whole. Din's Fire, Fair's Wind, and Nair's Love.